I would like to now introduce my brother, uh, David. Uh, David is David has been a faraway mentor, even though I've never told you that, brother. Um, your writings reached me in Nigeria, and they spoke to what I felt was real, what was true. I mean, I was trained as a clinical psychologist. I'm recovering from all that training right now, and you were a major part of that recovery. Um, in
Great.
in noticing that the world is alive. It's not dead. I don't need to squeeze therapy into a room, a whitewashed room, and embark on talk therapy in order to find a sense of ecology and purpose and beauty. Um, but so you've been there longer than you think. And David wrote the book Becoming Animal, which is my favorite, and The Spell of the Sensuous, which is my wife's favorite. Um, we're still going to wrestle on that. And he's a philosopher, he's an eco-psychologist, he's a visionary, he's a public intellectual thinker, and most especially, he's a brother of mine. So David, you want to say a few words and I'll ask you a question and then we start to dance.
Okay.
You're welcome, brother.
Sure. Thank you, Bayo. This is great fun to be meeting with you all in this outrageous moment in the world's unfolding. So much confusion. Wow. So much befuddlement that I feel. So yeah, just a few words by way of introducing myself. I'm a cultural ecologist, which kind of combines anthropology and ecology, but I'm not an academic. And so any formalized sense of what those disciplines mean is foreign to me. I'm a philosopher. Folks sometimes refer to me as a geophilosopher. That is somebody working out the ways of thinking under the influence of the more than human earth, under the influence of the plants, of the animals, of the winds and the waters. I have a particular fascination with what we could call the ecology of perception, or the ecology of sensory experience, the way the activity of our eyes and our ears and our skin, even our nostrils, binds our separate nervous systems into the encompassing ecosystem. But I'm just as fascinated with the ecology of language. That is to say, how what we say has such a profound influence on what we see or hear or even taste of the earth around us. I'm convinced that there are ways of speaking that many of us have inherited, being born into our particular cultures, into this goofy civilization, in this time, ways of speaking that actually inhibit and stifle the instinctive rapport between our animal senses and the animate earth around us. But I'm just as convinced that there are other ways of speaking, hiding under stones and rocks, or lurking just in our throats, waiting to find a way out through our tongue and our mouth, ways of speaking that actually encourage and enhance that spontaneous reciprocity between our senses and the earthly sensuous. So that's what I'm generally about.
Beautiful, brother. I love that you said that there are ways of speaking, in relation to the outworn mode. John, you're receiving a call? Are you? John, okay.
I've muted them.
Okay. Yeah, I was just saying that that there are ways of speaking that have become exhausted and exhausting. And so Yoruba elders will say, for instance, that there are wiser ways of speaking that are not straightforward, that one should speak or endeavor to speak from the corners of one's mouth, as opposed to the front, not just from here, but somewhere within the cavity are
Ah,
hidden worlds,
hmm,
or proverbs that have not been formed yet. And this
yes.
this this plays with the idea that I mean that biblical idea that the stones will cry out.
Hmm.
The stones will cry out if we keep on saying the things we're used to saying. But what does this all mean in terms of the world we're in right now? People are quick to diminish or dismiss this as poetry. Like, yeah, I get that, but how does this translate into the world we're in right now? A world of the Anthropocene, the world of George Floyd, the world of the lingering memories of the transatlantic slave trade. What does all of this mean? What would you say to that, brother?
I don't know what it all means. Uh, I do have a suspicion that, um, and honestly, folks, I had no idea what we'd be speaking of this morning. So this is
Yep,
fun.
me too.
Just jazz, improvisational riffing. Um, I do have a suspicion that a lot of the misery and massive disarray in the world at this time that has been building for a long time um, has something to do with uh, our obliviousness, a kind of learned uh, callousness and massive obliviousness to our inherence, our animal uh, um, embedment within the actual palpable, more than human earth around us. That we tend to, since you were just asking this question about language, that we tend to speak as increasingly in this curious civilization in which I live anyway, we tend to speak as minds, as disembodied minds that just happen to be
Right.
lodged um, inside our skulls, but that we speak about the world as though we were outside it, as though, yes, our body may be here, stuck in this physical field of shape and form and color, but our minds hover somewhere else, outside um, the sensuous, gazing upon the world from a kind of God's eye view.
Mhm.
But this is not a God like Babalao. It's not a God from a rich pantheon or multiplicity of different spirits, powers, goddesses, gods. It's as though we or our speaking selves situate themselves outside the world in the location of a kind of monotheistic presence who
Uh-huh.
sees all the world beneath his or her gaze, as though she can see into every nook and cranny of existence and know exactly what is going on, as though the world is a great object
Mhm.
or just a set of objects and objective, basically mechanical, basically determinate processes
Right.
um, that can, in principle, be figured out. And so we deploy our brother and sister scientists to figure out how this grand object actually works, as though we were not a part of this
Yeah.
object, as though we were not fully embodied, embedded, and placed and dancing within this field of
Right.
um, of shape and color. Yeah.
Right. Right. Um, what you say about the world, what I hear is the world is not entirely available for access, which is redeeming and emancipatory. It's decolonial stuff right there. The world is not is the world has imperatives of its own. I think Karen Barad will put it in a way to say that the world often kicks back. You know, it's not going to bend to our wills. It's not going to always follow our ideas of what is right or what is expected. The world exceeds the matrix or the frameworks of rights and privileges, right? And I like that idea of a world that kicks back and says, nope, I'm not going to be available for your scrutiny.
Mm.
I'm not going to be available for your lab experimentation.
Yes.
I have other imperatives of my own. Um, and what I'm hearing you say, how this is connected to the politics of today, is maybe there's some kind of dissociation. There's some
Mm.
kind of metabolic rift between the ways we speak and perceive and play with each other and frame education and economics that dwells in this abstractual place, this idealized ideational space that is
Mm.
removed from the other imperatives that are afoot in the world.
Yeah.
Is that how
Yeah.
you would? Is that how
Yeah.
you would?
I think that's very much how I see it, and I suppose it's almost too obvious to point out. But when we look upon the world as a grand object or as a complicated set of objects and objective mechanical processes, then we are tacitly, at least, assuming that the world is basically passive,
Uh-huh.
but we, the subject, the self, the one who speaks, um, has this superordinate place above and outside the world. And then we can arrange all sorts of hierarchies based upon that disjunction of the mind or the intellect or the scientific intellect that stands above the world, gazing upon it with that impartial gaze, and the world itself, which is basically assumed to be inert, inanimate, passive. Uh, and so then we can recognize that there are some presences in the world that are maybe, their passivity is a little less than that of the rocks, like snails and lichen and such. And then there are other forms of vitality that have a bit more agency, like, um, oh, wolves, perhaps,
Mhm.
trees. But then there are the higher animals. And then at the top and the apex of this hierarchical pyramid will be the human. But of course, as we know, it won't be all humans. It will be those two-leggeds who have attained to that space of uttermost priority, to that intellectual zone of utter transcendence, um, and others are closer to the earth, closer to matter, which is again framed as utterly
Inert.
inanimate,
Yeah. Inert.
inert,
Yeah.
determinate. And so that whole frame, that whole worldview is, I think, underwriting a great deal of the horror that
Mm.
we're experiencing today. Um,
Mm.
and the way some of us, of our goofy species, are massively leaning on others of our
Mm.
kind, and leaning our knees on the necks of others
Mm.
of our kind, brothers and sisters, because we can't help, we just have this habit of seeing certain folks as closer to inanimate matter.
Right. Right.
Inanimate
Right.
stuff.
Right.
Mhm.
Well, David, this is going swimmingly well, and I'm worried. Um, there has to be some point we disagree on. There has to be a place where we're like, nah, I don't see it that way. Let's see if we could find it. Okay.
Oh,
Because,
yeah.
and what I would really like us to model here, if you will, in our conversation is not just to pass ideas back and forth. It's that I feel that we're um, an animist, and I don't want to reduce it to that, only that critical cultural framework. But this idea that the world is alive and that we're not central to its workings
mm,
allows for different kinds of possibilities. For instance, it allows me to see that truth, in the ways that I grew up to see truth as the end point of all kinds of discourse. You know, that if what you're saying does not terminate at truth, which in a Western scientific framework would be empirical veracity, right?
mm,
That is falsifiable. If it does not terminate there, then it's not worth it. But there are ways of speaking and knowing and being that have always been, I don't know, first language. English is an acquired language for me, right? I think I'm doing pretty well in
yeah,
dispensing
lovely.
with it. Am I? But a first language is this knowing that um, that it is that biblical verse, and you shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free. That isn't exactly how my people see it. That truth isn't exactly liberatory. I'm getting into provocatory stuff here. It's not that there are other things that exceed truth, such as story, such as farting, such as digging a hole in the ground, such as praying to an ancestor, that the real is so excessive, so beyond our ability to articulate or to
Mm,
reduce to state axiomatic statements, that if we are to just tether ourselves to this highway, that we will lose sight of all the other gifts around us. So let me bring it home to this, if I can
mm,
articulate something that might be able to respond to. I watched a video today of men in India, someplace in there, where in the north of India, dipping themselves in cow dung as a response to the coronavirus. And the people who published this video, which is an Indian outfit, um, they did it in such a way as to make fun of these men. Like, yeah, this is what will discourage our people not to do. Don't do this. You want
mm.
to wait for the vaccine. But these men dipping themselves in cow dung as a response to the coronavirus pandemic are obviously doing it wrong. They're fools. And something in me has a response to that. And I want to see how we can play with that together, hold the tensions of that together. Okay. Um,
Mm.
yeah. So how would you sit with that, brother?
Well, I'm just bouncing off of what you were just saying about truth, and because it sounds like um, this truth that we take for granted in the modern, overeducated, over-technologized West, the
Yeah.
sense of truth as empirical veracity, you called it, um,
Uh-huh.
is uh, is a kind of I mean, it's a notion of truth. It's a kind of shallow sense, but there is a much deeper and certainly much older and richer sense of truth, which is the truth of right relationship. When I am living in right relationship with the other people in my community, when I'm living in right relationship with the terrain here, such that the land of this town is able to replenish itself over and again, because those of us two-leggeds living here are not destroying the ability of the land to
Mm,
regenerate and replenish each season, each year, then we
mm,
are living in some kind of truth. And
mhm,
the stories that we tell that enable and empower that relationship, we
mm,
could say, are true. Stories that hold us in right relationship to the world. So we could also then say that a culture that relentlessly destroys the
mhm,
living land that sustains it and surrounds it is not well acquainted with truth,
mm.
regardless of how many, you know, calculable, quantified measurements it has
Right.
uh, gathered regarding the quantifiable aspects of its world.
Mm,
So, story story that holds one in a vital, dancing relation with everything else. Those stories are deeply true. But in, again, the over-educated world of
Yeah.
the West, we tend to look upon many of those stories as being just superstitious claptrap.
Right. Right. So this would be superstitious, right? Because it doesn't fit
Mm,
the hegemonic scientific establishment's notion of reality that is cultural. There's some kind of cultural, and this goes again to how we see science, and science is going to play a huge role in how this course is framed. We're going to speak about some of these things in the course, and David is going to be here as well. We're there as well, doing it, sharing with me. Um, the idea that the scientific method grants us access. It's this idea of access. If
mm,
only we could deploy the scientific method, then that's it. Whatever comes out at the other end of the apparatus is truth, is good, is real. Everything that it gives away in waste should be dispensed with. Should be discarded.
mm,
But one question that the framers of the scientific method never came to answer, or never answered, was how we show up for those questions in the first place, how we frame the hypothesis, how we come to the place of asking questions is also part of the research, is also part of it,
of
um,
course.
is also part. So how we know is not so, we don't know the world by leaning away from it. We know it by making marks on it. And knowledge is that phenomenon that includes me making the marks,
Yes.
so that so the world is such a rhizomatic thing, so
Mm,
complex that the Western modern idea is to reduce it to bits and pieces that are intelligible. And I wonder, where is the space of unintelligibility? Maybe that's the notion of fugitivity we're working with, losing our intelligibility, losing our sense of being ordered by the nation state, by the hegemony, by the overculture, and
mm,
shape shifting into something else. I'm just
yes.
riffing here.
Well, I can only say I agree. I deeply agree.
No, you agree? You're not supposed to.
I'm so sorry, man. I find myself agreeing. But there's nothing. I don't really want to sound like I'm getting down on for myself, that I'm getting down on science, because a
Yeah,
great deal of what I know and hold dear in my heart, I have learned from the natural sciences, uh,
yeah,
particularly the earth sciences, and from biology and ethnobotany and such. But I am hugely critical of a kind of science, what we might speak of as a kind of adolescent science, that thinks that it has to immobilize uh, anything that it's studying and pin it down on a board, um, and turn some bright light upon it in order to learn something
uh-huh,
about that other. Why doesn't it just ask this other and enter into a conversation with it? That
right.
is the step into a mature science, the step beyond a kind of adolescent sense that you have
Dominate.
to you have to dominate, you have to immobilize, you have to objectify, uh, rather than subjectify, enter into rich conviviality and exchange with whatever you wish to ponder and study. Because accept from the get-go that you yourself are a creature, an animal, one of the very weird animals of this outrageous biosphere, and hence you're a part of the world you are trying to study. And so you can't ponder it or figure it out from outside. What you can aim at is to learn how to live in ever better rapport or relationship with the rest of this world. So
Mhm.
deepen your relations with things, enter into a good a wild dance with whatever it is you're trying to learn from and to study from.
Mm.
So it seems to me that we could speak of that also as science, but as a more mature, living, vital science.
Mm. Mm. Thank you, brother.
Yeah.
I'm reading some of the one of my dear sisters, Laura Weber, said something about eco-epistemology. Maybe we should start to think about an eco-epistemology, and just to say that, yes, it's, I mean, another name for it is eco-psychology, um, and even Yoruba ideas of knowing never dismantle or dismiss the land's influence, right?
Mm.
That knowing is always, knowing is not a private affair, it's not here. And I don't mean to distinguish the ways that is popular in many social media mediated conversations, to distinguish the head from the heart. I respect that, but I don't mean to reproduce that binary here.
Mm.
But what I do want to say is that knowing, as you say, brother, is is more is more is more tactile, is more tentacular,
Mm.
is much more web-like than we think it is, and it's the proliferation of the real. It's how we are made. That is, we not only know things, we're known in the act of knowing. It's like we're co-mothering each other just by gazing at the world, and this is what the um, lab coat clad um, scientists of old, with their positivistic notion of science, did not take into consideration that just to gaze at something is to unravel it, and is to be unraveled in the self same moment, right? It's
Yes.
uh,
Yes.
uh,
If 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 you if the lab coded scientist is a part of the animate, breathing world, then she, as she is gazing, is also exposed to what she is gazing at, is also being sensed, is also being seen from
yeah,
that perspective.
yeah,
And so to unravel is also to be unraveled. If we're bodily enmeshed, entangled, and placed in this in this earthly world, then anytime I uh, gaze out at another presence or being, at a mountain, for instance, there is so much of that mountain I don't see. I just see the side. There is a mountain outside my window here. Um,
oh, there.
and and so there is the side of the mountain that is offering something of itself to my gaze, so that I see the pinon and the juniper trees on its surface. But the other side of it, of course, is completely hidden. But if I were to wander over to that other side of the mountain, as I often do, then this side is hidden from my gaze. But even if I were to try and hold both of those together, the whole inside of the mountain is completely uh, invisible to me. That is, if we are ourselves mountains, or at least bodies, that I'm a kind of mountain to the ants that I often find crawling on my skin. I have a bit of an ant infestation in my house at the moment.
Right.
Um, um, then then we would have to give up entirely this notion of coming to a finished take on the world that actually gets it in some kind of knowing or complete knowledge. No, because a being that is in and of and a part of the world, fully embodied, fully embedded within the world, has only a very limited provisional experience of the world as it shows itself to me this morning. Um, and each being, even a blade of grass that I approach, will have aspects of itself that are utterly hidden from my uh, from my gaze or from my intellectual appropriation. Um, and it's because each thing has its hiddennesses, its invisibilities, its absences, that I'm drawn into relationship, that I'm drawn even to want to investigate or learn more about you, this other, you blade of grass. So um,
Mm. Mm. Like, like the
you
world is
follow.
shy.
Yeah, the world is shy. It also resists
Mm.
us, and resists any uh, story or attempt to sort of catch it within our net.
Yes.
The the fun in trying to catch something within your net is then discovering how it resists and wiggles out, or rears up from within the net to bite your nose off.
Right.
And in that way, you get a sense of the otherness of
Uh,
things, that not any one of these other beings is me. And yet everything is a variant of me, as I am a variant of it. But it's not ever just the same as me. It's this strange other you, um, a thou. And that holds for any person that I meet as well. It's it each of us is inexhaustibly enigmatic and unfathomably weird
right.
to any one of us. Yeah.
And you know, it even goes even deeper, David. Like, it's not just that we're different from others, it's that those differences inhabit us. Like, we're deterritorializations of our own selves. We shy away from our own selves, so that even the very concept of being named, of an identity that categorizes me, that stabilizes me, is already undone by my being here,
Yeah.
right? Which is the reason why, and I'm just piecing things together here. This is part of my own decolonial journey, brother, and this is the reason why Yoruba people actually have things that are other than names for their children. They call them orikis, and I've spoken about them, but I never pieced it this way together. You know, orikis are songs. You know,
Yeah.
it's poetry. It's just that it's not convenient to always sing a song when I want to get you to pass me a cup of water. So we stuck with the modern conveniences of names. But really, when a father is pleased with a child, um, and he calls that child, he doesn't call the child by the name, he calls the child by the oriki. And he might
Mm.
start to sing of the dragons that the child has slain before she was born, you know, or the hunters that are the ancestors of that child. And I like the idea that an oriki is never the same in every moment. It always changes, so
Ah,
that you are not stable. You are a becoming, you're a thing in the making. And it's that moment is part of your makeup, so that we are always composed of differences, which is scandalous to the modern imagination, that we're set, and we have to deal with a world of different negativized others.
ah, lovely. Really lovely. I want to bring up um, another aspect that is implicit in our conversation, implicit in uh, at least what my ears receive of your singing, even through the strange digital ether that we're all lingering in at the moment, which is, I mean, you've used the word poetry a few times, and how certain ways of speaking can be dismissed as poetry. But
Mm-hmm.
gosh, it seems to me, Bayo, that what I really dig and so deeply enjoy in conversation with you, in listening to you, is that you, in your own way, curiously different from me in my way, we're trying to uh, wield our words in such a way as to be speaking with our entire body, or to be speaking as bodies, to be speaking not as uh, bits of spiritual fluff that aren't just lodged behind our eyebrows somewhere, but to be speaking as animals, as this very curious, very strange, audacious animal that we are, the human, but as an animal nonetheless. And hence, in many ways, just one of the gang, along with the spiders and the humpback whales, that is feeling out words, choosing words. I notice the words that come to your tongue and your lips are words that have rhythm, that have texture, uh, or I could say words that taste good in my mouth. Um, that is not just using terms that have a kind of abstract meaning that I celebrate or I think is really cool. No, because so many of those utterly abstract words have been so uprooted from the soil that all the dirt has fallen off their roots, and they just sort of float. And when people hear them, or when I speak such words um, as phenomenology or
Geometry.
epistemology, sometimes people have to sort of withdraw from their own animal senses
Yeah.
and climb up into their heads to understand what the word is saying. But by and large, as I speak, and very much also as you speak, brother, you're using terms that have a bodily resonance, that um, they have a liquid melody to them, or sometimes a jangling dissonance that affects my body, not just affects my mind.
Mm.
And it seems to me that this is part of our work today, and part of our practices is to feel out each of us, and for each of us it will be different,
Yeah.
finding the words, the phrases that um, move us in our creaturely, fully embodied presence in the world, that ways of speaking that are a kind of song and not just a set of denotative dictionary definitions that we're deploying, but rather we're speaking and we're singing as we're speaking, because then those who we're speaking to spread their awareness out through their whole animal flesh in order to receive what we're saying. And so to hear a person speaking in that way, one becomes ever more embodied, ever more animal, ever more creaturely.
Mm.
And I think that is a key piece of the decolonizing work today,
Mm.
is to learn how to feel and recognize ourselves also not only as our indigenous sensibilities and sinking back into our indigenous ancestries, but also deeper still into our inherence as animals and what we share in common with the other beasts.
Right.
And perhaps even our thingly bodily density and weight that we share with the stones and with the river and with the mountain itself.
Mm. Mm.
Does that make sense? Do you follow the thought?
Oh, it does it. Thank you, brother. It makes the kind of sense that makes me want to dance. And I'm sure for people here, it's the same too. Thank you, brother. It felt like I'm just spilling with proverbs here today. That uh, my elders would say that you take a word like pounded yam and you dip it in soup, like a morsel of pounded yam with palm oil always tastes good. So there's a kind of eloquence that isn't about this abstractual distance transcendent stuff, but is about being present with soil and tree and earth and stone, and being present with palm wine.
Yes.
And I think, and as much as I would love to go take this further, we will continue the conversation when we get to our fugitive space our digital fugitive space together. And there we would explore, I think, the promises, the practical promises of doing this work together.
Yes.
What does it mean to sit in Oriki, to sit with song, to be there in flesh? What kind of
Yes.
fleshly, carnal, incarnated politics can we provoke or conjure today in these times of questions without answers and answers without questions? What kinds of politics are alive, you know, animal politics? And what does it mean to become animal? Not just in the Deleuzian sense, you know,
Yeah.
but in the sense that you have been exploring. What does it
Yeah.
mean to become animal? What does it mean to become, as I'm using it, becoming Black? Very provocative, but that's the classic, folks. What does it
Mm.
mean to become Black? What does it mean to descend, to adopt a catabasis, to fall to the earth like a libation? What does it mean?
Ah, beautiful.
Well, so we will do this together, David, and when the class resumes October 18. But I just want to say thank you. I'm always filled with gratitude for your presence, for your words. I feel you're a teacher for this moment. And I read a piece on The Guardian recently that said, humanity at the crossroads, because it turns out we have not fulfilled any of the goals we set for ourselves in 2010 to solve the biodiversity crisis. So there's this report that says we're in trouble. We never met any of those goals 10 years later. So we're at a
Mm.
crossroads. And I feel that you're one of those, the voice and the lineage and the prestige of the things that you're speaking about is situates itself in this moment of crossroads. So thank you, brother, from my
Ah,
ancestors to yours, from the soil under my feet to yours, from my children sleeping on their beds right now to your home. I greet you and I thank you for being here with us. Thank you.